Good evening, and welcome to our celebration of International Women's Day. It's also our first event of the Gender Justice Series, Fighting for Gender Justice Series. I'm Bev Neufeld, founder and president of PowHer New York. I want to welcome all the many new activists who've joined us for the very first time. Many of you are March Alliance folks, and you were invited by Catherine, and we're really happy to have you. We want you to continue your activism through PowHer because New York needs you. And thank you to the YWCA. Many of you are on this event today and for co-sponsoring this event. There are also many PowHer partners here tonight who make up the PowHer network of 100 organizations and individuals who've decided to work together across issue areas to really move forward gender equity in New York. We see the interconnection of all the issues of reproductive rights, childcare, domestic violence, equal pay. And by supporting each other's campaigns, we have already made a big difference and passed laws that are progressive, change policies. So now we believe that there's more opportunity to do much more, and we can move forward on a much larger anti-racist, gender-focused agenda. Sadly, the need is greater than ever. We may be moving toward a recovery, but how do we repair the damage of the pandemic, the devastating effects of COVID-19 pandemic on women, especially women of color? And how do we create long-lasting change so we're not here again? So how do we break down the systems that created an environment where so many people are suffering in economic insecurity, discrimination? Well, the PowHer New York leaders have been talking about this throughout the pandemic. We've met regularly on Zoom, of course, and we formulated a response to the pandemic. It's a vision and a plan for systemic change, a roadmap for inclusive gender justice. That's what we call this idea. We're creating conversations and we're seeking solutions, not with one view, but with a multiple view, crossroads of gender, race, class, and age. We want to build an inclusive, multi-generational feminist movement in New York, and we're asking you to be part of that. This is one of our events. To sort of give you a better idea, I'd like to show you just a 1-minute video. It's not long. And we created this during the pandemic. We also created the roadmap during the pandemic. We've done a lot of work despite the challenges. This video is called PowHer the Vote because we made it for the election campaign, but I think it's still really relevant right now. So Abby, can you play that video for everyone?
I grew up in New York. Like you, I'm heartbroken about the effects of COVID-19 on New York and the profound impact on women, especially women of color. Systemic sexism and racism can no longer be denied.
That's why organizations that work on gender justice created a vision and a roadmap for a more equitable recovery.
We believe in the full humanity
and dignity of all people.
We believe in an inclusive feminist vision
of equity, community, and caregiving.
We believe in anti-racist policies that promote
health, education, safety, and economic security.
We believe in our interconnectedness
with each other and with the planet.
We need leaders who create solutions that embrace this vision.
It's PowHer the Vote for Black lives,
for equal pay,
for women's safety at work, home, and school,
for reproductive justice,
for childcare,
for women's leadership.
PowHer the Vote for inclusive gender justice. Seize the opportunity. Go to PowHerTheVote.org.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Of course, that video was about the election, and voting is the first step. And actually, I think we should be very excited because the outcome was vastly different than it was 4 years ago, right? So we know that works. But now Now we need action. While we have enormous challenges, and they are, we also have incredible opportunities ahead. And that's why we're talking about childcare, one of PowHer's priorities. Before we start our first speaker, just note that there's a chat box. Put in any comments you want and ask questions. We'll be having a Q&A session. Also, the bios for the speakers will be in the chat box. And if you're having a problem, just email us at info@powherny.org. There will be a follow-up email tomorrow with all the resources and actions that you can take. So don't worry about that. And if you're tweeting, because it's about childcare, use hashtag #SaveNYChildcare. So I don't know if you had a chance today to check out what was going online for International Women's Day, but it was amazing. Beautiful people around the world really coming together to talk about women's economic and physical security. The purpose of the day is to honor the achievements of women, but also it's a call to action to accelerate gender parity. This year's theme was interesting. It was choose to challenge. Well, I think it's a great theme for us because we're challenging the system, and we're so glad you're with us tonight to talk about this. One of the obstacles, the greatest obstacles right now to gender parity and recovery, of course, is high quality, affordable, accessible childcare. So this is not just a problem in New York, it's a problem around the world. So we have an expert to talk about that, giving us a perspective. And I'm really proud to invite to speak to us tonight, Anjum Sultana, who is with the Ywca of Canada. And she was one of the authors of a recovery plan that Canada did, similar to what we did. We were inspired by you, Anjum. So please share with us what's going on with our neighbor up north and other perspectives.
Yeah, thank you so much for the invite today. I'm calling to you from Toronto, so just not too far from where you are, and I've spent many times in New York City. And in fact, I would have been there this time. I would have been there this time right now for the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women. So we were actually supposed to be there last year, but then, the world kind of shut down because of COVID-19. But it's still great to connect with our New York colleagues. And also, I'm really grateful to be here as well as a member of the YWCA community. So I know a lot of my colleagues from YWCAs in the state of New York are here as well and are sponsors of this event. So hello. So I guess a bit about YWCA Canada. So we are the YWCA national office in the country to the north of you. And we have been around for 151 years. So this is unfortunately not the first pandemic we've experienced. And I would imagine for our YWCAs in New York State as well. And so for us, what we have seen in our history is that in times of crisis, what we need more than anything is care and community. And that's why we have such an explicit focus on childcare, because we've seen during this time that is the type of investment that has been saving us during this crisis. When we think about childcare, we saw when that was not present, Canada's economy, and perhaps here in the US as well, it grinded to a halt. When COVID first hit Canada, we actually saw women's labor market participation drop to levels we haven't seen in Canada since the 1980s. So it's unfortunate to see in a year that we were going to mark how much progress we've made as a country, as a global community, it is maybe the year where a lot of that progress could have been undone. But we also were able to be resilient to that because of the investments we had made over the last number of decades in childcare. I will say childcare is part of the unfinished business in Canada when it comes to gender equality. We currently don't have a national early learning and childcare system, but I'm really pleased to share that because of this pandemic and the increased focus on gender inequities, we are very, very close for Canada actually having one. hopefully established this year. And we've also already seen some of the infrastructure related to that already start to come into place. So a bit about YWCA, we operate in 300 communities across the country in Canada. We're present in 9 provinces and 2 territories. And childcare, we're actually one of the largest providers of childcare in the country. So when we talk about childcare, we can really talk about it through a pan-Canadian perspective. And for us, that was actually one of the big pillars of our feminist economic recovery plan. We have a pillar that's just focused on the care economy. And as we've seen, care is so essential, not only in terms of ensuring that women can go to work, but also as a job creator. And so I actually wanted to share some really exciting news. It was just announced today in a recognition of International Women's Day. One of the things that YWCA Canada and our YWCAs across the country have been fighting for is an action plan on women in the economy. And I'm really glad to announce that today, the Minister of Finance, Minister Chrystia Freeland, she actually announced the task force that will guide this action plan. And YWCA Canada, our CEO, will be part of that. So we've been talking about the need for such a task force and the need for such an action plan. And it's really great to share with all of you today on International Women's Day that is in progress. So really, really excited for that. And we're really excited to share our expertise around childcare in the formulation of Canada's action plan on women in the economy. So childcare is an issue in Canada. It's an issue in the US. I want to share a bit about how childcare is structured in Canada. And in many ways, we have different ways of funding childcare. So we have childcare that is government subsidized. We have childcare that is primarily funneled or paid for through childcare fees that parents or caregivers incur. And we also have childcare that is privately delivered. So it can be unlicensed or licensed care, and it can also be private, nonprofit, and also in some cases publicly delivered. And childcare looks very different across the country. And I do want to mention this because similar to the state of New York, the US has many different states, and sometimes it can feel, and I know certainly is the case in Canada, then how do we get a national system? And what I want to share is sometimes it can start with a particular jurisdiction and then scaling that out. And so for us, a big push for childcare has come out of the success in the province of Quebec. So back in 1997, so over 20 years ago, the province of Quebec implemented universal low-fee childcare. And essentially what they did was, if you're of a certain income, they would subsidize your care. So it could cost right now in the province of Quebec anywhere from $8 a day for childcare per child to up to $21, $22. And that range is dependent on how much money you make. So if you make around 50 to 52K in the province of Quebec, you can get the lowest amount. The more income you make, the higher the childcare fees are, the less the subsidies, but it is something that is generally speaking affordable for a lot of community members. And that's not always the case across the country. Quebec is a leader in this respect when it comes to affordability. In the city that I'm living in, Toronto, it can be as expensive as a rent payment to pay for childcare. It can be, close to $1,200 a month, depending on how old your child is, to actually have your child in childcare. So as you can see, big variation across the country. In Quebec, what we've actually seen, because of the subsidies, because of this universal low fee, it's actually made it really accessible for women to re-enter the labor market. So prior to this policy, Quebec was lagging compared to other provinces in terms of women's labor market participation. But over the course of 10, 15 years, it's actually one of the leading provinces in the country when it comes to women's labor market participation. So we've seen how crucial it is for getting women back to work. We've also seen in Canada, we've seen incredible success in Quebec. And I will say affordability is one of the biggest pieces of success in Quebec. But the challenge has been, how do we ensure high quality childcare? And part of that is also ensuring that workers early childhood educators are paid enough. So in this past fall economic statement, the government actually realized in Canada, we actually need to pay our early childhood educators more, because right now that's the big challenge, retention. If childcare workers are feeling they're not getting paid enough for the amount of labor they're putting in, they may not enter that field or they may exit. So there was actually a very conscious effort this past fall economic statement in November to put some money aside for retraining and retention of early childhood educators. We've seen, especially because of this pandemic, other provinces also starting to look at Quebec and see they need to invest in childcare. So right now in the province of British Columbia, they're fighting and working on $10 a day childcare. Similarly, in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, they're working towards that same aim. And what we have been fighting for is it's really important at the provincial level to have that delivery of service, but we actually need a cohesive set of standards. We need money and we need spots, but we also need to make sure that it doesn't matter if you're in Toronto, in Halifax, in Yellowknife, in Vancouver. When it comes to childcare, there's a minimum floor of standards. And one of the things that we had advocated for, and we've actually seen money put forward now to create it, is a national secretariat on early learning and childcare. So that's something that's currently live. It's happening right now. The government is bringing stakeholders from across the different provinces and territories to figure out how do we create a national set of standards. So that's something we're really pleased to see. And it's because of the power of advocacy that we've actually seen this realized. Because I will say, the dream of a universal early learning and childcare system is something that's been something we've been focusing on for the last 50 years. So we're really excited to see in 2021 that this could finally be realized. And I will say, we have a precedent for this. When we think about Canada, one of the big things we often hear about is our universal healthcare system. And similar to healthcare, which started in the province of Saskatchewan and had this set of standards, the Canada Health Act, we're really excited to see perhaps 2021 could be the year we can have a set of national childcare standards, with Quebec leading the way and other provinces following forth. So I'm really excited to kind of share this like in the moment kind of updates with you. When it comes to childcare, so Canada is about is a tenth of the US. So when I say some of these numbers, just times it by 10, that's the impact that would be felt in the US. We're actually seeing if we invested in an early learning childcare system, that would return up to $29 billion per year for Canada's government coffers. It would create up to 200,000 jobs for early childhood educators, another 100,000 jobs for people in construction, and would take and would put forward at least 1 million more women back into the labor market, because now they have access to childcare. So when I talk about some of the potential impacts in Canada, times it by 10, that's a potential impact in the US. I'll stop here because I think I've shared a bit about what we've done in Canada and where we need to still go. And I think the one kind of last benchmark I'll leave you with is the thing that we're advocating for the most is that we need consistent funding. And what we're actually calling for is that every year, Canada's GDP, at least 1% should be directed to early learning and childcare. This is actually an OECD benchmark, and we want Canada to aspire to that. And hopefully, through the work that we're doing across the borders here, this is something we can have as a vision for North America as well. So I'll leave it there. I hope that gave you a bit of a sense of the landscape in Canada, and I welcome any questions in the Q&A.
Great. Thank you so much. That was so informative, and some great ideas for us to work on as we move forward in solving the childcare crisis in New York. I'm so proud to introduce our next two speakers. They will come on together, and that is Blue Carreker, who's a lifetime advocate and really a force of nature. She's now a key leader of the Empire State Campaign for Childcare, just an amazing coalition. And I'm proud to say a PowHer New York board member. And she will be joined by Gladys Jones, also a force of nature. And Gladys, I think we need to have you, there you go. Hi, Gladys. Right. Gladys is not only a child care provider, which is a lot of work, she is also an activist, and she has organized many of the early childhood educators in an organization called ECE on the Move. So we're excited to hear you talk about the campaign in New York and where we're going. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Beverly. And we're really pleased to be on here today and to greet all of the March for Women's Lives and other women's advocates, and hope you get really excited about the work that's going on in childcare in our state. So Gladys and I are both part of a statewide coalition called the Empire State Campaign for Childcare. We are made up of advocacy organizations, policy expertise, childcare providers of all modalities, parents, and anybody who is really concerned about what's happening in childcare. And a lot is happening in childcare. So I think we're going to talk a little bit today, give you a little flavor of what we were dealing with in New York before COVID, and also what has happened since COVID, to lead into some of the things that are one of our amazing champions in the state legislature is going to talk to you about after us, in terms of what we're trying to do with the legislature to change the face of childcare in New York. So I want to first turn it to my colleague Gladys to talk a little bit about the whole provider experience.
I'm a survivor, what can I say? My workforce provider perspective. My story is in New York City, which is the reflection of many women of color. New York City is a hub of diversity. I am an early childhood educator in a residential setting, also known as family childcare home-based provider. Not my choice of title, but for our industry. Pre-pandemic, we were on the road to extinction. I have been in this industry 17 years and receiving nearly the same pay. We serve in low-income neighborhoods, state level of reimbursement significantly lower than federal recommended. The quality standards discriminate against family child care and community-based providers. The regulation, state and federal increase our costs. It's pretty hard to meet these costs at $4 an hour pay when you calculate what we get in subsidies. Parents without subsidies pay just about the same. Low pay means recruitment and retention of workforce are very difficult. We don't know what is livable wages. I feel ostracized. And this is pre-pandemic. We were on the road of extinction. Back to you, Blue.
All right. So hard days for childcare providers, for parents too. You know, I was a person raised in the economy when people were still trying to live up to this mythological American family ideal where, you know, one male father was supposed to provide for everything and the mother's supposed to be able to stay home and, you know, buy all the appliances and new tricks to take care of the household. And the myth was really out of reach increasingly for most people and out of touch with what women wanted for their lives. So there've been a lot of changes since that time, and we have fought and won a lot of advancement for women. But we've often focused on how do we get into the career ladder? How do we get pay equity? How do we get the respect and treatment that men have had, whether it's in politics or education or in the workplace? We're a little late to figuring out why we don't have a system that supports families. We came to that recently and we worked together and won paid family leave. That was a first step. We can actually stay home now, most of us in New York State, and have time to care for our babies first after they are delivered. We've won now some sick days for a lot of workers so that if our kids get sick, we can actually get paid time off to be with them. and we can get sick time for ourselves. But childcare is still hanging out there, a total mess. And before the pandemic, we still had a subsidy system to provide assistance to parents in New York who needed it. And we could only meet about 20 to 30% of the families who actually qualified for the assistance because there wasn't enough money in the system. We had child care centers that were increasingly finding it difficult to stay alive, like Gladys described, because they couldn't get reimbursed at a decent level. Even private pay centers, in order to stay open, couldn't pay afford to pay the staff a living wage. And parents, as a result, found it more and more difficult to either afford childcare, which was becoming about the price of college, or to find a childcare center that was accessible to them, near enough to them to juggle childcare and work, and that they could depend on to have consistent quality staff. So the system was not working for providers, and it was not working for parents. And the Empire State Campaign for Childcare came together to advocate for improvements in that system. In the midst of that, COVID hit. So Gladys, tell us a little bit about what happened during COVID.
Okay. So family child care stepped up during the entire pandemic and remained open to serve essential workers, and essential workers serving essential workers. But we are only that in name. No resources such as PPE given to help maintain the providers that remain open while the unknown before us, risking our families, ourselves for the same pay pre-pandemic, $4 an hour. Major loss in enrollment. Childcare providers closed their doors, got sick, or passed away. The state distribution of federal assistance for those that applied was a disaster in getting to providers. Many of us in New York City did not apply because we needed to sustain ourselves, did not have money to put up front. The funding not flexible to use as we needed to survive. We slowly disappeared. We are almost extinct. Back to you, Blue.
So yes, we have deserts before, now we have mass closures of many, many childcare areas. Those that stayed open, as Gladys said, put their lives and the lives of their families often at risk in order to provide childcare for essential families. Parents, all right, what do? COVID comes and there's not a lot of information about how it's passed, how people get it, especially children. Can children be carriers? Can children get the disease? What is happening? Are our child care centers safe? If they're not getting the funding that they need for PPE and for things like that, can we trust that our children are safe there? And yet we have to go to work if we're essential workers, or if we're virtual workers, we have to work from our home. So how do we take care of our kids? And what happened increasingly over time was that, in fact, thousands were forced to leave the workforce. 80% of the people who have left the workforce as a result of COVID were women. And a huge factor in that was the lack of access to quality, dependable childcare. So we're starting to reopen now, all right? Or we are at least thinking about it. People are starting to get their vaccines. And we have an amazing opportunity in front of us. That is because of all the advocacy done by people like Gladys, by people throughout the state and throughout the country who said we cannot ignore childcare and we cannot get our economy back going again if we cannot provide childcare. And women will not go backwards decades back to being forced to choose between having a career, having the income they need for their family, and quality care for their children. All of that advocacy has meant that we have champions now in the New York State Legislature and champions in Congress. So we are about to get more federal money for childcare than we have ever seen. And our biggest concern is, will that money get to the people who need it most? Will they get to providers like Gladys? Will they get to make childcare affordable? Will it be handled better than the small amount of federal money we got last year? And will we use it as a state to establish the foundation to move forward toward universal access to quality childcare? Or will we simply use it as a Band-Aid and be back a couple years from now when there's no more federal money asking the same questions? So we want to turn it over to our champion to talk a little bit more about how he's working with us and what we're working for to actually change childcare in New York.
Great. Thank you so much, Blue and Gladys. That is daunting. The problem is daunting. And Gladys, thank you so much for sharing, with your heart, how difficult it is. So we're all working to make that better. I hope that that will happen. And we do have a champion. We have Assemblyman Andy Hevesi. I was going to say Andrew, but Andy's better. We welcome you. And we're so happy to have you. You are now the new chair of the Committee for Children and Families. I know you've been fighting for women's issues and many issues since 2005. We're really happy to have you on board on this issue for children and families. So tell us, what's going on and how can we make things happen in Albany?
Okay, well, first, thank you, Bev and PowHerNY, and to my friends Blue and Gladys. Thanks for what you said, and also for Anjum. I learned a lot about what's going on in the country to the north of us, and that's very helpful. So first, happy International Women's Day to everyone. I want to start by being completely honest about how New York State has been treating its female workforce over the last decade, and I know you know this better than I do. But the fact is, New York State has been terrible when it comes to treating women in the workforce, particularly those who are paid through our nonprofit sector, which is primarily composed of women and also women of color. So New York State has a track record now, a decades long, and I think it's longer than that even, for our nonprofit sector of paying poverty wages. That's who New York State is. And despite multiple calls over several years to increase that pay, to get the vast majority of those female employees off of public assistance, the governor's office has shot those down. So right off the bat, you got to start with, we do not have a good record on dealing with women in the workforce that we're paying for directly. As a matter of fact, the executive has been making sure that we don't increase those wages, which is just wrong. And then Blue is right. I want to touch on this. The response to COVID was not what we wanted from our partners in state government. Now, I've had conversations with some of our friends, the Commissioner of the Office of Children and Family Services, Sheila Poole, who is great. And I am grateful to her for teaching me a lot about the subject. But the commissioner was perfectly candid and said, yeah, we could have done better with the CARES Act fund that we were supposed to get out the door. What the providers needed were upfront payments, and they didn't really get them. So what you saw and what Gladys mentioned was 100% correct. We saw providers going out of business. And that was while our baseline before they started going out of business in COVID was a crisis, but then you add COVID on top of it and it got even worse. So we have depleted our own childcare sector. So now let me talk about the potential opportunity and the good news that we have. So I believe Bev mentioned it. She is 100% right. There is an incredible opportunity for New York State to change the direction of the childcare system once and for all if we're smart. And the reason is that we received $469 million from the Consolidated Appropriations Act, which was the last stimulus act that passed in December. It was the Mitch McConnell Act. And then the one that just passed the Senate, I believe it was last night, we've been told will add an additional $1.8 billion for a total of $2.3 billion. So that is something that New York State can either do something remarkable with, or we could stupidly mess it up and go back to where we are. And my colleagues and I in the legislature are going to be pushing that we can use this to reset a system that was designed in the 70s that has gaps all over the place. And I'd like to talk about addressing some of those gaps. So if we take advantage of this once in a lifetime opportunity, and I believe it is a once in a lifetime opportunity, I don't remember, and certainly the people on this call know better than me, have you ever received $2.3 billion for childcare to spend basically as you will? And the answer is probably no. So how do we take advantage of this? Well, first, you've got to make childcare affordable. And one of the ways to do that is to cap the co-payments at 10% of the federal poverty level. Now, the current circumstance is in counties across the state, they have differing levels of co-pays. Some of them get as high as 35% of the poverty level, which means that a lot of families are just priced out of getting affordable childcare. They can't get these subsidies. So the plan that Blue and I are pushing, and some of my colleagues are pushing in the legislature, would decrease the co-payments for parents down to 10%. I want to give the governor's office and Sheila Poole, Commissioner Poole, credit for putting in their executive proposal a way to get that number down to 20% of the federal poverty level. We're going to go a little bit better and try to get them down to 10%. I hope they will agree with us. The second problem for our providers, and let me start, providers have a lot of issues. They didn't have money for PPE, they didn't have the supports they needed. But we're pushing for, and I'll again give credit to OCFS for, in their plan to spend the initial money, the $469 million, they put in, let's see, I'm sorry, I'm switching gears. For providers, one of the things we need to do, and I'm sorry, I lost track for a second, is we need to pay for a minimum of 12 absences, because one of the real big problems for our childcare industry, and this is systemic, is that it's not based on enrollment. So what we're doing is based on absences for kids. Kids, if they're absent, the providers don't get paid. And that means that during a normal time, if a kid gets the sniffles or a runny nose, they're not coming into childcare, which means the provider's not getting paid, which is just not a sustainable system. Then you add in on top of that COVID, where kids are really sick, and you're definitely not getting kids, you're going to have a lot of absences, which means that the providers are not being able to pay their rent or their utilities or the other costs for their workers. So we are proposing to pay a subsidy for a minimum of 12 absences. I believe that's for every 6 months. And we will continue to push that. 2 more points, and then Bev, I will get off. But we have the opportunity to now, and this is really important, I don't believe that enough people in New York State have access to subsidies. I believe it was Blue who mentioned that we're only serving about 23% of those who are eligible. So part of our proposal is to increase the eligibility levels to 85% of the state's median income, which will catch a lot more people, tens of thousands more people and families than we need. And then the last point, if I can, the workforce. The workforce has to get paid. I recently saw a movie, I will say it's a great movie if anybody who hasn't seen it, called Through the Night, where they talk about and actually show what the life of providers and childcare workers are. And there was a worker who really hit home for me in that particular movie, that had to work 3 jobs just to make enough money to get enough to have her child go to care. But that means she didn't have time to see her own kids. And that's not what we want to be doing with government subsidies. We want to make sure that she has access to her kids, and that frankly, that lady in that movie and that everyone in the childcare workforce gets paid a decent wage, so they don't have to be on public assistance, they don't have to work multiple jobs and get time away from their kids. So we have a real opportunity to change the childcare system, and I look forward to working with all of you to try to get that done. And I'm happy to take any questions, Bev.
Great, thank you so much. Well, I think we're going to have other people come on as well. So while we're doing that, you hit home on that issue. PowHer started out as the equal pay campaign. And so one of the main issues is, making sure that women are paid a fair wage. We can get women to take other jobs, but the caregiving jobs are so important and they need to be honored. So, just devaluing women's work it's been the norm. And now in New York, it's got to change. So we have some questions here. I guess one thing I would like to turn to you, Assemblyman, and say, does it matter if people actually send emails and make phone calls? what's that? Is that like, I think people don't realize, the connection, and I hope you'll affirm that there is one.
Oh, I will more than affirm. Yes, they make sense, and yes, they help push the case. But more importantly, we need you. I need you. Blue needs you to get involved over the next 3 weeks. We have 3 weeks till this final budget is done. All of my colleagues are as focused as we can get them on childcare, which is a good amount. But remember who you're talking to. These elected officials have a million issues on their plate. So yes, those emails, those calls, they work, because what happens is I took the Children and Families Committee chairmanship because there's unbelievable opportunity here. It's just something that I've wanted to do for a while, and it's a great way to work on some of the issues we discussed. My colleagues, however, are not all focused on childcare. So your letters will bring them back to that. And I'll tell you what, the best way to get to an elected official is if he or she gets an overwhelming number of contacts from people in their district. That lets them know that the people that vote for them really care about this issue. So good example for me, if I get 100 emails from people in my district who are asking about an issue, I'm going to be extra careful about what I do with that particular issue. So the answer is, that was a very long way to say, yes, they really help and they really matter. And we need your help over the next 3 weeks to make sure that our plan comes through.
Great. Thank you so much. And Blue, okay. What are we asking for? Simple, so people can understand it, right? 1, 2, 3. money, money, money. but still,
but not just money. Okay. So one, we've got a state budget decision that's going to be made by April 1st. All right. So we cannot see any cuts to childcare in that state budget. We cannot. And we should see some kind of increase in state investment, so that we see that there is a commitment to prioritizing childcare going forward. But perhaps most important is that the legislature puts some language in there that says there is a plan. In fact, providers and parents and advocates worked for the last couple of years to put together a step-by-step plan about how we get to universal childcare and how that kind of federal money that we're now getting can be used to get us going that way. So we're asking the legislature to step up, put it in there, say, we want to have a handle, and we want those most impacted to have a handle in how we handle and dispense this money.
Right.
Can I answer that, Bev? Would that be okay?
Yes, of course.
Yes. The New York State Assembly has, we're going to be talking about this issue over the next couple of days. Our one house will be voted on. Our one house resolution for our budget plan will be next week. And there will be language on how to spend this money in that one house resolution.
And we got to get it in the Senate too.
Right, okay. Absolutely.
Can't promise that one, but I promise the assembly.
That's right. As an assemblyman, right? That's true.
But I will. Sorry, Bev, if I can, one more thing. Yes, we have had productive conversations with the chairman of the Children and Families Committee in the Senate. So I believe you have a real opportunity there as well. Senator Brisboard has been great.
That's incredible. So we want to respond to the current moment, but we want to build a better foundation and a better future, right? So for you, Gladys, that means, help now and then help in the future, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so that's good, right?
I want to be around for a little bit longer.
We want you there. So we do have a question about Canada, and we're wondering, where does the money come from for Quebec childcare subsidies? Is there a significant political support for childcare standards and that 1%?
Yeah, so primarily it comes from the government. So it is something that the province of Quebec's government has funded. There are, sometimes there may not be spots in the nonprofit childcare centers or even the family-based childcare centers. So if a person does go to a private nonprofit, privately delivered childcare center, any fee that they would pay, the government will cover afterwards through subsidies or through additional funds. So that's typically the process right now. And I will say, when it comes to childcare, what we've seen and the conversation we're having right now with our governments is that it pays for itself. And something in the short term enables people to get back to work, because we actually know mathematically, if we don't have women going back to work, we will not have a recovery in Canada, in the US, in any part of the world. And so for us to address the she session, we need a she recovery. And the biggest policy measure to do that is childcare. So that's something we've been stressing when it comes to, it's good for gender equality, it's good for creating jobs, and when you make that initial investment, it pays for itself over the next number of years. So that's the argument we've been using. And we've seen in Quebec the incredible opportunity there's been in that province, and we want to see that across the country.
That's incredible. In the 1970s, I think the participation rate was about 45%, and over the years it's gone up. Right before the pandemic, we just cracked 50%, over 50%, women's participation, and now it's just plummeted. So there's a real concern. What is this going to mean in terms of, this is like, you're talking about moving backwards 20, 30 years. And of course, we know that kind of thing multiplies and multiplies over time. So it's really important that we get women the help that they need now to get back to work. So let's see. This is a really interesting question, I think. What is the role of a large New York City employer in this conversation? Well, I know from my advocacy that if we have New York City employers stand up for these kinds of policies, that means a lot. So I know that that's true. Blue, do you have any other thoughts on that, or?
Well, I think there have been a number of experiments off and on, and people still talk about the possibility of providing incentives to employers to set up their own childcare and to, encourage employers who are part of economic development committees to, take a look at when they're bringing and starting new businesses or giving incentives to businesses. What are those employers doing about childcare? And I do think that's a really important part of any review in economic development is, if you want a new company to start, a new company come in, what is their dedication? What have they done to make sure that employees can access childcare? But I think overall, we want to move toward not an individual system where it depends on where you work, whether you have access to childcare. We need a statewide system that's affordable and quality.
Great. Anything else on that point? Okay. I think we're just at that point where we need to close. But I think, Blue, that point you just made, we all need to realize that it's not the woman's problem, right? But we've been told it's our problem, deal with it, figure it out, right? And now we just need to look at the fact that society needs to create better systems if you're going to have women work. Sadly, not everybody agrees with that. But here in New York, that's the mantra. So we want these better systemic changes, systemic supports and foundations, so that it's not you against, the odds. It's you working within a system that supports you. So I thank all of you so much for joining us this evening and sharing your expertise. Anjum, I think we're going to connect you with Blue and others to go more into detail on some of the things in Canada. So you really opened our eyes to that. Someone had a question about subsidies and rather about standards. So I think that's something we'll talk about online. But thank you to all of you for a really great conversation. And we're going to move to just a short part of our program. So I am excited to ask Karen King from Buffalo. Where are you, Karen? There you are. Great. I'm going to ask Karen King from Buffalo to come on in. I think you have to speak or something, or magically Abby or Rye will get you in there. There she is. So coming from Buffalo, the Commissioner for Public Advocacy, Erie County. So Karen, You are one of the most passionate advocates I know. So, give us some words of wisdom about what can we do and how can we get some of these things done and why?
Well, I just want to echo what's already been said. I mean, there certainly needs to be a broad plan. I mean, we're talking about a state plan, but eventually we need to nationalize childcare. And New York should certainly pave the way to provide that model, which will then scale up to a national model. I think we have to take that on. And I just think that, Assemblymember Hevesi said something interesting. He said, well, I'm interested in childcare, but a lot of my colleagues aren't. And, maybe we should just stop calling it childcare and start calling it, workforce development or economic development, because that's what it is, right? We can't meet these challenges unless we understand the role that childcare is an infrastructure issue. And of course, it's been framed as a women's issue, and that's because of patriarchy and a lot of other things, and we don't have a lot of time to go into that. But I just want to say what an honor it's been to work with such a dedicated group. And I have colleagues from Western New York. I know Sherry's on the call and Vanetta's on the call. And in Erie County, we swang into action back in March under the direction and leadership of our Deputy County Executive, Maria White. And we have all been working together on an emergency childcare task force, COVID related, obviously. And all the different iterations and phases we've gone through when it first started to provide childcare to frontline workers and to provide childcare providers with what they needed so they could be open for frontline workers, transitioning to the summer and what are we going to do with children when school ends, and then when school started, providing a substantial amount of the CARES funding to fund virtual learning centers for students who were 100% virtual, particularly in the city of Buffalo and many of the outlying suburban areas, which eventually became hybrid models, but parents needed a place to take their children to learn virtually because they had to go to work. So we've been addressing these issues, and our advocacy subcommittee is asking some of these large questions that have been raised today. What are we going to do moving forward? We have this incredible opportunity, this massive infusion of money. What are we going to do? Are we going to do something different, or are we going to be here 2 years from now when that federal money dries up? So we have to take action, and to our assembly members' point, send those letters to your representatives in your districts. I think Rye is going to put the link to the letter that PowHer has created that you can use as a template to send. And of course, support PowHer and participate in our discussions and our advocacy agenda items. And of course, check out the roadmap. We worked on the roadmap tirelessly starting over, I think, the summer. And the roadmap is a comprehensive plan on how to move forward, addressing gender equity and gender justice, economic justice through an anti-racist feminist lens, which is just so important in terms of all the work that we're going to do moving forward. Thank you all for the work you do. It's an honor to be working amongst you, and thank you for your work.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen. So just so people have a visual, this is the roadmap, and you can find it at PowHerNY.org. If you are interested, you can sign on to the vision, which is calling for this paradigm shift, and also looking at our issues much more holistically, really bringing people at the table, focusing in on the greatest need. So we welcome you to be part of that. I will send you the link if you don't have it for the action, but also I want to tell you, just as a little teaser, that March is an amazing month. It just starts with with Women's History Month and International Women's Day, which has been a beautiful experience. Glad everyone's here today. But now this year, March, we have Equal Pay Day for all women's Equal Pay Day on March 24th. So stay tuned. We have a forum with Attorney General Letitia James and experts coming together to talk about COVID and how we deal with equity moving forward. We also have virtual Twitter hour, a virtual rally like we did last year when we adapted. And we will also be introducing a piece of legislation that will increase transparency so that employees have an idea of salaries. So that's the next thing. We continue to work on all these fronts, and we need everybody, working together if we're going to push forward this agenda. Again, it can't be said enough. This is a challenging time, but it's a time full of opportunities for us to change some of these systems. We have money coming in for childcare, but making sure that women's issues, whatever you call them, are not cut. They are supported, because that's what's going to bring us to a fair and equitable and successful recovery for New York. So thank you very much for being with us. Send us any questions, and we look forward to seeing you soon on another Fight for Gender Justice conversation. Thank you.